Good afternoon and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining. I'm Todd Green, the Executive Director at WorkRise and an Institute Fellow here at the Urban Institute. WorkRise is pleased to announce its fourth annual request for proposals. We're excited to share information with you today and can't wait to see the ideas you put forward. But before we begin, I'd like to share a couple of housekeeping notes. This webinar, it's being recorded and the recording will be made available on the WorkRise website afterwards. For accessibility, we've enabled live transcription for this webinar, and you may adjust your settings using the bar at the bottom. We'll be taking questions for a Q&A session at the end of our presentation. All participants are muted, but please put any questions you may have about the RFP in the chat at any time during the webinar, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. If you have any questions after the webinar, or if we can't get to your question today, you may send questions about the RFP by email to workrise@urban.org. Next. WorkRise wouldn't be possible without the generous support of our funders. Our funders are listed here, and more information about them, as well as our funding principles and statement of independence on WorkRise's website. Next. Now, many of you are already familiar with WorkRise, but I'd like to start with a refresher for everyone, especially since I think our model perfectly frames what we are trying to achieve through our RFP. As you prepare your applications, I hope you'll refer back to it and think about how your work intersects with the issues on our agenda and the activities in our approach. Next. WorkRise is a research to action platform. We aim to rebuild a more equitable and resilient labor market that expands opportunity and economic mobility for workers, especially workers earning low wages. Now, as part of that mission, we seek to dismantle barriers that have impeded equity in the labor market for Black workers and other workers of color, and we're appropriate to engage and involve the voices of diverse scholars, practitioners, community members, and other stakeholders throughout our research to action cycle. Next, WorkRise is designed to be a big tent for a variety of perspectives and help drive consensus on what issues to prioritize for improving economic mobility for workers. Now, too often, the various stakeholders in the labor market, workers, employers, policymakers, researchers, advocates, and workforce intermediaries, for example, they operate in ways that seem siloed from each other. Next, so to organize this, our research cuts across issues in 6 core pillars: the macroeconomic context and policy environment that influence our work. In just a moment here. And then also employer practices such as compensation, scheduling, and efforts to bring greater fairness to hiring and promotion. How workers search for and are matched to jobs that suit their talents and needs. And then different methods for giving workers a voice and say over their tasks and working conditions. We also focus on diverse practices for building and recognizing workforce relevant skills that lead to job attainment and career growth, and broad family and community factors outside the workplace that influence workers' employment. Next. We engage these issues at different entry points along the entire feedback loop for knowledge building and impact. We engage with the diverse leadership board and with other external partners to frame a knowledge agenda that represents the priorities and questions of key labor market stakeholders. We seek to build consensus, not always on solutions, but at a minimum on what the current evidence says and what questions have yet to be answered. Once we've identified knowledge priorities, we work to fund new research that sheds light on these important questions through a variety of approaches and from a diversity of viewpoints. WorkRise's communications and engagement functions work to amplify research findings, both of our funded research and of work by other researchers and practitioners doing important work on these topics. We use a variety of tools and formats to translate dense research findings into digestible, actionable content for practitioner audiences. And last, we engage with stakeholders around evidence to both influence action and to surface new questions that belong on our agenda. Next, Now, we measure our success by the extent to which the evidence base expands and based on investments we've made. Also on new consensus, how it's emerging around key priorities and hopefully solutions, and ultimately whether change makers use our evidence to shape policies and practices and drive change. As we hope it's clear through this RFP, you play an important role across this spectrum. We want you to hear from you and also what important questions, research questions related to the labor market on topics that the communities and organizations you engage with are grappling with. So we look forward to learning about the innovative ways you will generate new insights and evidence to answer those questions and how we can support you in the process. And we're excited to work with you to both amplify the work that you do and to ensure that it shapes debate and also action. So with that, I'll hand it over to WorkRise's Associate Director for Grant Making, Caleb Quakenbush, to give us an overview of the RFP.
Thank you, Todd, and good afternoon, everyone. So as Todd mentioned, grant making is a core component of WorkRise's vision and strategy for creating a more equitable and resilient labor market. To date, WorkRise has committed over $7 million across 40 projects, ranging from innovative pilot projects in partnership with employers, local agencies, and other stakeholders, to new foundational research that organizes previously fragmented data to yield new insights. This year, we're investing up to $3 million across projects that will no doubt have similar impact. The full RFP is available on our website, and somebody from our team will be sharing that in the chat. It describes in much greater detail WorkRise's research priorities, which you just heard a little bit about, and it also includes a frequently asked questions as a resource for interested applicants. Also on the website, you can find a copy of the intake form that you will need to complete using our online portal, instructions for the letter of inquiry and budget that you will upload as part of your submission, and starting today, a link to the online portal to actually start your application. And we'll be providing a brief demo for how to navigate the portal later during this presentation. The next slide, please. Yeah, there we go. So as I mentioned, our award pool for this RFP totals $3 million. In the past, our average funded project size has been about $250,000. So that's some smaller projects and some larger projects. And for this RFP, we're considering proposals up to $500,000. WorkRise groups the projects that it funds into two major categories. So first, we have research projects which shed light on a topic largely through existing data or through new surveys and qualitative research. So examples of that include analyzing existing data from public sources or administrative data through special data partnerships, looking at natural experiments that have happened in the past to understand the effects of a policy or a practice change, simulating the effects of a potential policy or practice change through, for example, microsimulation or other techniques, creating new surveys and data tools, or conducting qualitative research through carefully designed stakeholder interviews, community meetings, or focus groups. And second, we have pilot studies, which include a more real-time element to evaluate an innovative policy or a practice for effectiveness or scale. So these have kind of a real-time element of something that's happening on the ground. And those can include randomized control trials, quasi-experimental methods, or a combination of methods to understand the nature of a very specific intervention or innovation. So all projects should include a principal investigator that has research experience, and we cannot make grants to individuals. So applications will need to come from an organization that can receive and manage grant funds on behalf of any researchers or other partners who are involved in the work. And we strongly encourage a diversity across a number of dimensions, especially projects that include researchers from diverse backgrounds and at different career stages in service of creating a diverse pipeline of scholars examining labor market issues. Projects led by or done in partnership with minority serving institutions, traditionally underrepresented organizations, and mission-driven organizations that build capacities to conduct research or serve their communities, and projects that come from diverse regions and examine issues in ways that are conscious at different geographies or policies or community contexts will play out differently. So solutions might play out differently, say, in the Midwest versus the South South or the West Coast. And as in previous years, this RFP will be conducted in 2 stages. So this first stage, which is open now, applicants should submit letters of inquiry describing their project by April 7th. And later this spring, we will invite a handful of finalists to prepare full proposals that address reviewer feedback and provide additional detail on project methods and activities. So next slide. So we assess applications along 3 dimensions to consider projects both now at this LOI stage and for final funding decisions later on. So first, we assess projects for relevance to our research agenda and to the populations that WorkRise seeks to advance economic mobility for. So in his overview, our executive director showed our 6 core pillars in our frame. And those again are macroeconomic context, employer practices, job search and matching, worker voice representation and power, skills and training, and social determinants of work. Some examples of those and specific knowledge of priorities around each of those pillars are given in the full RFP announcement. So I encourage you to review those and consider which best applies to your project. The full RFP announcement also describes how projects should relate to our priority populations in terms of the outcomes measured. Second, we look at the methods and approaches proposed to conduct the research and consider their strength and feasibility. So we recognize that different methods, both quantitative and qualitative, may be appropriate depending on how well researched the topic is previously and the research background and field of study of the principal investigators. Broadly, we're considering factors such as whether there's a well-defined, novel research question that will hopefully be answered at the conclusion of the project. So will this project tell us something new that was not already known in the field? For quantitative projects, is it possible to conduct the proposed analysis on the kind of data that you propose to use? How representative will the data be of the overall population of interest and for particular subpopulations that are important? Do you have a large enough sample size? How strong will your causal arguments be based on the kind of analysis that you put forward? For qualitative projects, we really want to see projects that meaningfully engage a range of perspectives from communities and stakeholders within those communities and capture insights about an issue from different vantage points and different stakeholders. And of course, the strongest projects will often use a combination of methods. So, doing that qualitative work to surface views directly from stakeholders through community engagement, and that can in turn give greater context and meaning to data collection and analysis. And last, in terms of our criteria, we'll assess the potential for impact and influence of a project. So we're asking, does this project generate new data on an important policy debate? Can it generate new consensus among different stakeholder groups? Does it surface an issue that has maybe been under-discussed or underexplored, but has deep implications for workers' economic mobility? And how will findings be framed and communicated so that they can be consumed and applied by stakeholders positioned to drive action and change? Next slide, please. And we say more about the kinds of activities that we fund in the full RFP announcement, but briefly, I'll just emphasize that WorkRise primarily funds research, and all projects must include a research component. So we encourage people to budget for dissemination and engagement as well, such as producing written content for non-academic audiences and participating in events and conferences. We do not provide operating funding for pilot interventions. So proposals that are positioned as pilot projects should specify how the intervention itself is being funded from separate sources, whereas WorkRise dollars are being used to primarily support the evaluation and dissemination. And again, I'll refer you to the Q&A in the full RFP announcement for a little bit more detail about what we need there. WorkRise funds should not be used for proprietary research, such as private R&D or marketing. And last, while we want to influence policy and practice by creating publicly available knowledge, WorkRise cannot support lobbying, litigation, or activities that endorse specific legislation or political candidates. And next slide, please. So finally, here's a reminder of the timeline for this RFP. So all letters of inquiry are due at 6:00 p.m. Eastern on Friday, April 7th. Our application portal is open today, and you can submit your application anytime between now and April 7th. We cannot accept late or incomplete proposals. So I encourage you to kind of test out the portal and make sure that you're familiar with how to actually apply ahead of April 7th so that you can submit your application on time. This spring, we'll invite finalists to prepare more detailed full proposals, which will be due during the summer. And we plan to meet with each finalist team to discuss the full proposal process and to provide additional feedback on their proposed projects. We will also at that time notify any unsuccessful applicants if your project has not been advanced. Our external peer reviewers and senior leadership will assess full proposals and make final funding recommendations to our leadership board in the late summer and aim to announce awards from this RFP around Labor Day this year. So with that, I will turn things over to Megan Techney, WorkRise's Director for Strategic Engagements and Partnership, to say a bit more about how WorkRise envisions the public goods and stakeholder engagement elements of grantee projects. Megan?
Great. Thank you so much, Caleb. So we're going to talk a little bit more now about who should be applying, which you just heard from Caleb, and the type of partnerships we hope to see in those applications. So just as a quick recap, as Caleb said, who are we looking to see for eligible applicants? So it's academic institutions, public entities, nonprofit organizations, state and local governments, and for-profit organizations. All of the organizations must be based in the United States or its territories. And research, as Caleb mentioned, must be led by a principal investigator with research expertise who can publicly publish these research findings. And applications must ensure that at least one of the organizations is able to receive and manage grant funds. Next. So you heard Todd talk a little bit about the unique approach of WorkRise, which is that we aim to bring together a variety of perspectives on terms to figure out what it will take to improve economic mobility for low-wage workers. And so as we move forward in this work with you, we're really seeking geographic diversity, both in terms of the research institutions supported and the communities served. To this end, proposals from well-resourced institutions and organizations are strongly encouraged to partner with less resourced, mission-driven institutions and organizations to elevate BIPOC perspectives and other historically marginalized voices. We especially encourage projects that are informed by scholars and practitioners who are Black, Indigenous, and come from BIPOC serving institutions. Excuse me, sorry. Additionally, projects that use community engagement methods are of particular interest. And we believe that that's because the best research is those positioned to make an impact when it engages and partners with the people and communities that it studies. So while it's not a requirement, we believe that research projects that build meaningful engagements and partnerships with diverse stakeholder groups are critical. And this can include workers, employers, organizers, community organizations and institutions, and public organizations at local, state, or national levels. And what do we mean by partnership? Well, we mean working together to inform the research design, to test approaches and interventions, to disseminate findings, and to build trust and consensus around these findings, and hopefully have partnerships you can rely on into the future. We do request that only one lead partner fill out the LOI form on behalf of the partnership, and you can indicate who is the partnering organization in the relevant field. Next. So as part of a research action to network, we use this grant funding as a tool to invest in new evidence on the challenges and solutions to accelerate economic mobility for low-wage workers. So when you become a grantee with WorkRise, you become part of that network, which we think is exciting, and we hope that you will too. But it also means we're going to be working together in partnership to transform policy and practice. So we want this research and your products to inform and engage stakeholders in positions to take action. So specifically policymakers, employers, worker advocates, there's a large list. And so to support that, you're going to be expected to produce original research and data products, as well as at least one product that clearly translates your research for a key stakeholder audience. So this can be a policy brief, this can be a data visualization, this can be a blog, an infographic. And so please be aware that as we work together, we're going to be talking across communications, engagement, and partnership to lift up your work during your research period and after your research is released. So as a reminder, as Caleb said, when you submit your budget, both in the LOI stage and the file proposal, WorkRise funds can be used to support research and engagement activities. We have a communications and engagement team, such as myself here at WorkRise. We'll work with you on engagement strategies as well as promotion and communications, but you're going to want to make sure you have capacity on your end. Please note that we don't support lobbying or litigation activities. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Bridget Valson, who is our Director of Strategy and Operations, who's going to give you an application walkthrough.
Thank you for your interest in applying to the WorkRise Request for Proposals. The guidance shared with you today will help you prepare a letter of inquiry that meets the RFP's requirements and use our grants portal to submit your LOI application. Prior to applying in the grants portal, we strongly encourage applicants to read the RFP application materials and guidance available on our website and in the grants portal. We also encourage you to prepare your LOI submission in advance using the online portal application guidance. This document provides a preview of the portal application form fields. Refer to the project narrative guidance and to the project budget guidance to prepare submission materials you will need to upload to the portal. LOIs must be submitted through the WorkRise Grants portal, which can be accessed at urbaninstitute.force.com. We cannot accept LOI applications submitted via email. When you're ready to start your application, you'll need to create an account. The applicant should be a representative of the primary organization that will be overseeing the management or administration of the grant if awarded. If you've previously applied to WorkRise for funding, you can apply again by logging into your existing account. If this is your first time applying, you will need to create a new account. Applying is a simple three-step process. First, you'll complete the application form. Next, you'll upload the required documents, and then you're ready to submit. On the portal homepage, you'll find links to helpful resources. To get started on your application, click on View Open RFPs or the Request for Proposals link. Select the funding program you want to apply to, and on the About This Funding Opportunity tab, scroll down and click on Apply. In the open application form, the information icon provides more detail about what's required in each field. There are also notes associated with certain fields that provide definitions and additional information. The application does not have to be completed in a single session. Click on Save Draft and Exit to save your progress so that you can return to the form later. In the attachment section of the application form, click on Upload Files to upload the required documents. You can remove and upload new versions by clicking on Delete File. Refer back to the RFP application materials for specific instructions on the content and format of the LOI narrative. The LOI budget should provide a high-level estimate of the costs necessary to carry out the project's key activities, tasks, or phases described in your LOI narrative. You do not have to submit your LOI until you are ready. Applicants can continue to edit the form and upload required documents until the RFP closes. To make changes to a saved application, click on Edit Application to open the form. Click on Save and Continue to navigate to the section of the form you want to edit. When you're ready to submit, click on Submit Application. Once your LOI is submitted, you will no longer be able to make changes. To check on the status of your application, click on My Applications. Applicants are permitted to submit more than one proposal to the same RFP so long as the proposed projects are unique. If you need technical support during the application period, please email workrise@urban.org.
All right, and just as a reminder, a recording of this will be available on the WorkRise website. So if you didn't catch all of that, you'll be able to replay it after this event. So with the remainder of our time together, we will answer as many of the FAQ or audience Q&A that are coming in, and I've seen a few come in already. So I will just go ahead and get us started, and as need be, I might hot potato it over to Todd or Megan or to Bridget to answer particular questions. So one question that came up was, do you see childcare policy as a space for this RFP? I think it was the first one I saw. And just in terms of subject matter, so childcare, as it relates to labor market outcomes, absolutely. So if there are aspects, we kind of call this like social determinants of work, that influence the outcome of workers in terms of their ability to get or afford childcare and how that plays out for the workers themselves. That's something that we're absolutely interested in for this RFP. There's a question about which states or areas do we prioritize? And we don't have a very a specific, we're not saying, Texas and not Florida or anything of that nature. But what we want to know is what is the geographic context for whatever issue it is that you are examining. So if you are analyzing an intervention that plays out in a particular area, we want to know a little bit about that. But we also want to know kind of the broader lessons that can be applied in other settings and other contexts. How are we defining underrepresented and minority populations for the purposes of the RFP? So I'll say very briefly, you should see in the intake form that is available on the website. We give applicants actually a chance to define that for their projects. There's a section where you kind of walk through and click for different categories around education, around race and ethnicity, around, I believe, disability status is in there as well, to tell us a little bit more about who it is that you're examining or who's involved in your research. And so we're not saying, we're only interested in XYZ population. I think we want to know sort of broadly to understand, but we also want to understand for particular subgroups. So I'll pause there. Todd, do you have anything to say beyond that on kind of the research priorities around geographies, specific subpopulations, and then kind of particular thematic or topic areas?
I don't have anything to say about that, but before we move on to the next question, there is a comment in here about indirect costs. So if you can make sure to tackle that as well.
Yes, I was going to tee that up. There were a couple of budget questions that were coming in, so I was grouping those together. So actually, that's a good segue into that conversation. So there's, Bridget, if you're on, I hope you can help talk through a couple of these, starting with indirect cost policies, and then when it's appropriate to cover salary expenses, which in many cases it is, just to give a preview. And then in terms of the question about operating support for private projects, how to factor community partners into budgets.
Yeah, so our indirect costs policy is that WorkRise wants to see budget proposals that reflect the true cost of the work that you are proposing to us. So we assess indirects on a case-by-case basis, and we don't have a maximum cap. So you should, if your organization has a NICRA, you should submit that documentation with your budget proposal, or you should just put a brief explanation in your budget narrative about how your indirect costs are calculated if they are factored into the budget that you submit. And then the second question, Caleb, was on.
So there's a clarifying question around salary costs in budget. So for, I believe it's kind of for research activities and dissemination activities when staff are involved, absolutely include their salaries. Yeah. I think the broader question is around maybe pilot projects and operating costs. I think maybe one example to give, and Bridget, jump in if I'm mistaken, but the salary cost to say you have somebody who's actually deploying the intervention It could be, I'm just giving this as an example, not saying that this would be a priority, but like if you have a financial counselor who's based at a work site and you're kind of evaluating the effects of that on, workers' economic stability, I don't think we can pay the salary for the financial counselor to kind of operate the intervention. What we're wanting to fund is the time of the researchers who are evaluating the intervention. And then if there are community partners who are participating in events and engagement, so if they need to travel to an event or be compensated for their time speaking at an event, or in some cases you might be working with focus groups and you want to recruit a focus group and you're working with a community partner. Oftentimes you provide incentives for people to come. Those kinds of things can be reimbursed for the purposes of this RFP.
Yes, and to add on to Caleb, the salaries and wages in your budget proposal should be limited to key personnel on the project at the primary applicant organization. If you're planning on subgranting funds, those staff members need to be on a, you can include them in your broader budget estimate, but if you advance to the full proposal round, you'll have to itemize them separately under a different budget category. So salaries and wages is really the primary applicant organization staff.
And then just as a reminder, we have more detailed written budget guidance available on our website. And if you've dug into that and you still have questions, WorkRise at urban.org is the email address for sending kind of those more detailed questions. There's a question here about, would you accept multiple proposals for the same team for different kinds of activities? The answer is, I believe, yes. So yes, we will accept kind of multiple proposals from the same organization and from the same team. However, those need to define very distinct projects. So there needs to be, you could, again, just pulling from recent examples, if you have one research question that's around the delivery of childcare policy and how that affects workers, or if you're looking at a scheduling intervention, those are two kind of separate things, and you can submit those. But what we would not want to see is two things that's like, question 1A and question 1B, kind of the same general thematic area. We would want those just kind of grouped together as one project in one submission. And then lastly, I'll just add there that WorkRise, we try to kind of diversify our research investments portfolio. So it's unlikely that we will fund multiple projects from the same team, but we would entertain multiple projects proposed from the same team. See here, would funding publicly available toolkits and quality? Yes. So toolkits and data assets, things like that. I think Megan said a few words about kind of the public deliverables. So at minimum, we want that kind of the research report that analyzes findings. We want kind of what we call a translation piece that takes those findings and then puts them in a format and in a language that's digestible for a high value kind of stakeholder group. But on top of that, we are very interested in hearing about other ways of engaging those audiences, both through kind of your events and conference, but also if there are there are these coding repositories that some really data-centric projects might engage. There are other kind of fact sheets and videos and data visualizations that speak to other audiences. So we just want to make sure that the products are suitable for those audiences. So absolutely, we're very interested in funding a variety of kind of delivery outputs, provided they're kind of publicly accessible and are not sort of proprietary in nature. Review our questions here. Recommended per project request amount or maximum that should be requested. So again, the maximum budget that we will entertain is $500,000 for this RFP. but we don't have a recommended budget. I think I said that our average to date has been about $250,000 is kind of the average project size. And again, we've had smaller and larger projects on either side of that. It's really about, kind of the appropriateness of the budget and the activities that you will undertake, and the impact that you hope to achieve relative to the overall cost. Can community-based organizations submit multiple research proposals with different partners? Yes, again, with the caveat that they need to be kind of distinct projects. Does WorkRise support research focused on K through 12 institutions if they have an employer partnership focus? So I'm not, without a little bit more detail, I can't say too much, but if this is, again, relating to outcomes for workers, particularly workers earning low wages and their economic mobility trajectories, by all means, we want to know from employer perspective, from the kind of institutional and community and family and social context that also mitigate outcomes. We want to know from a big kind of macro point of view. So it's really about placing the project that you have, the question you have within the labor market context, and letting us know kind of how that will play out. Who can we contact for feedback from a previous proposal? So unfortunately, WorkRise gets, last year we had over 100 applications that were submitted, and we do not have the bandwidth, unfortunately, to provide kind of individual feedback on past proposals. So we cannot provide that. If you're selected to be a finalist and invited, there will be kind of a series of conversations that will happen as you prepare your full proposal, and we'll be providing some feedback there. Typical project duration. We will, I guess a typical project duration is anywhere, you could be as short as 6 months. We'll entertain projects kind of up to 24 months. But especially for longer projects like that, we don't want to fund you and then hear from you in 2 years. We want to be learning with you. And we're very interested in projects that will yield findings kind of over the course of their work. And we understand that they're kind of a different range of things. Some things can be turned around very quickly, but if it's a pilot intervention, might take a little bit longer to set those things up. So we want to be able to fund a range of timeframes. And again, I think the natural place to have that conversation over the exact kind of timeframe and what we are able to support in terms of the activities, because we know that, and we have in the past funded initiatives that have even longer time horizons than that, but we're kind of an early investor in some portion of the work early on. And then, the applicant it's on them to kind of fundraise for the later years from other sources. Mixed methods research approach, i.e. quantitative and qualitative, absolutely. I think, we want to see that the methods that you propose are suitable to the research questions that you pose. But as I mentioned earlier, I think the strongest applications often include a mix of methods. So you have data collection and analysis, but then you're also hearing from particular stakeholders and getting their insights on how that data actually plays out on the ground. Can funds be used for existing programs or projects, or do potential funders need to create a new program or project fund? So I think this question is about, can you have multiple funding sources for a particular project that you're working on? And the answer is absolutely yes. In fact, often that makes your proposal even stronger. But what we want to know in your proposal, and as we talk to you, we want to know kind of what those other funding sources are covering, and we want to know what WorkRise dollars are covering, so that we can really understand the kind of the value add that we're bringing to your project. So I'll pause there to see if there are any comments from my team on any of the questions that we've had so far. I'm getting nods, so I'm going to keep going. Please define principal investigator. So the principal investigator is somebody who has experience conducting research. They don't necessarily have to have a PhD, but they should be very fluent in kind of research methods, They probably have a CV of previously published publications, but they're really bringing kind of the research insight and value to build kind of public knowledge. So I'll pause there and listen for others on my team to say maybe a bit more about what we're looking for. So getting a thumbs up. So do you have advocacy and policy research focusing on the impact of the current infrastructure plan on the workforce? And is the grant multi-year? So in answer to the first question, we would be extremely interested in hearing about how your project connects to federally available dollars from any of the kind of recently passed legislation, whether it's CHIPS or the Infrastructure Act or the Inflation Reduction Act, because we are really keenly interested in that to action piece and understanding how the findings of your research will play out and people who are in positions to deploy those funds and being able to inform their work to employ them in ways that are in service of greater job quality and greater economic mobility and job access for people. So absolutely. Is the grant multi-year? Again, I mentioned we can do a single year and multi-year grants, but we want to kind of work, we'll work with you a little bit more if you're invited on the exact kind of time frame for that. Are research projects designed to use publicly available data going to be disadvantaged in the review processes? No, I don't believe that's the case. If you're using census data in an innovative way to answer an interesting question, by all means. Reporting was listed under a yes is a type of thing of funding. Can you confirm that this includes the work of journalists? So I think by reporting earlier, we were talking about time spent from project team members to report to WorkRise kind of on progress. So we check in with you periodically over the course of the grant. Sometimes it's semi-annual, sometimes it's quarterly, but we also want to just maintain regular kind of periods, even outside of this regular reporting window. So absolutely for reporting that kind of work. On the kind of the journalist or media piece, so we don't necessarily fund journalism, but we are, if you have a press strategy as part of your kind of dissemination and engagement plan, that's something that we would certainly want to work with you on. Can research questions be locally focused? The answer is yes. I think our deputy director, who couldn't join today, kind of worded it in an interesting way. So if you're thinking about a local project, we're very curious about how those lessons can be applied, kind of up and in a broader context. But if you're focused on a national project, we actually want to, understand how the lessons from that big kind of national vantage point can play out in particular regions and localities as well. So, as you're preparing your LOI, I encourage you to think more broadly or more targeted in your work as you're thinking about the implications and the kinds of stakeholders and audiences that you might want to eventually influence with your research findings. Let's see. Is the principal consultant or investigator able to apply as the primary applicant? I'm not sure I understand the question, but so the principal investigator can be an employee of what we call kind of the primary organization. That's the organization that receives and manages grant funds. They can also be an employee of a partner organization if the money. I think that the important part is we want an organization that is able to actually kind of legally receive, and has, kind of the relevant tax documentation, et cetera, the grant funds and manage those, and either send them to the PI if they're kind of, if it's a community organization that's applying and managing, but then they partnered with an academic partner to do the research, that's okay. Or if it's the academic organization that's applying and receiving and they're based there, but then they're, subcontracting out to a community partner or other organization to do some other part of the work, that's okay too. I'll pause for my team. Smiles and nods, always a good sign. Let's see. Your pathways. So there are several questions in here that are kind of very targeted to specific kind of project types or questions or issues. What I would encourage you to do, if you have just a kind of a clarifying question about, X, Y, Z, is to send that to the WorkRise email address. We can't say definitively, kind of like yes or no, unless, it's clearly about, something that's not related to the labor market. But we can kind of provide a general context and say, hey, maybe, this would qualify as long as you can kind of connect it to, a particular issue or topic in the labor market. I don't want to go too deep in the weeds on specific kind of project ideas or questions on this webinar, just so that we can answer questions that are maybe more broadly relevant to our audience here. So is there any guidance on whether the lead applicant should be the organization implementing the intervention or the organization conducting the evaluation? I think what makes most sense for your project is fine. I think I said earlier, it can be the academic partner, it can be the intervention partner, but as long as that organization has their relevant IRS documentation, et cetera, and we know where to send the money and where to follow up if we have questions, I think we're good there. With interventions, addressing research projects, is it allowable to use grant funds to flesh out, expand, or evaluate these projects? Not sure I completely understand this question. Okay, so I believe the answer is yes. I mean, what I'm interpreting this as is, we've done previous research on a particular topic. We've built kind of an evidence base, and we want to build on top of that, or we want to think about kind of a particular intervention. Absolutely, by all means, that's that's right in the lane of kind of what we're looking for. We want to, and you'll see this once you've had a chance to kind of dig into our LOI guidance a little bit more. Part of your LOI will be, you'll be required to kind of situate your project within the literature of what's already known, and then kind of articulate why or how you're building on top of that, and kind of expanding the frontier of knowledge. Yes, we can work with fiscal sponsors. I think there's kind of an extra layer of work that we do, but it's totally feasible.
Yeah, and I'll just add that it's actually better if your organization has a fiscal sponsor. It's better for the fiscal sponsor to be the primary applicant, because they're going to be the one receiving the award, if that makes sense, given the legal implications.
Thank you, Bridget. Unfortunately, we're not set up to fund dissertation research, just in terms of the amount of time it kind of takes to turn over awards and work and the kinds of research we're targeting. We're unlikely to fund dissertation research. However, so I will say, if you're a postdoc, or if you're working at a university and there's a PI who's working on a particular question, they can use their graduate assistants and things like that and cover their time on the project for a broader thing, but just not for dissertation research. Workforce pilot programs that have already been launched or are still in the pilot phase. Maybe do you want to say a little bit about kind of the different, how novel an intervention should be to be kind of considered a pilot, or at what stages WorkRise is really interested in kind of like plugging in and understanding that evaluation?
Yeah, I would answer that just really briefly by stating that we are interested in interventions or pilot projects that surface or indicate something new that we don't know. It could be a new population. It could be a new approach. So I guess I would answer that part of the question that way, to the extent that I understand it.
So question about, can a member of the research team be based abroad? The answer is yes, but the applying organization needs to be based in the United States, and the research needs to be focused on US-based labor market issues. But yeah, we fully expect, there might be, a variety of geographic settings where, your staff are distributed, or your community partner could be multinational. But again, as long as it's focused in the United States, the organization has, kind of a foothold in the United States. We're open to that. We've answered questions about kind of pilot projects and direct services. Again, if you have specific questions, I encourage you to review the budget guidance and the Q&A of the full RFP announcement, and then follow up with us if you have further questions. Does the PI need to have expertise in the labor market issues specifically? So you don't need to be a labor economist, but you should be fluent in the literature and be able to kind of connect, again, the research question to labor market outcomes. And again, wearing Elizabeth Jacobs, our deputy director, we want to see kind of multidisciplinary or cross-disciplinary proposals. So economists, sociologists, and kind of the whole spectrum of academic approaches to understand these issues from multiple perspectives and methods. Period. Can you be affiliated with a federal government agency, or is it only state and local? Bridget, do we have any concerns about those kinds of affiliations? No? Okay. So I believe you can be. Again, I think it comes down to the ability to kind of receive and manage those funds. If your organization is capable of doing it, then we can do the same. Our requirements to specify an industry focus? If so, is there a limit to the number of industries that we're focusing on? No, you do not need to specify an industry focus, but if you are focused on a particular industry, we're very curious to hear about that. And there's no number of industries. I mean, I think, back up a second, like in your LOI, we want to hear where your research is focused. So if it's an intervention, or if your kind of data collection is focused on a particular group, say you're doing a survey of retail workers, we absolutely want to hear that. And I think what we really want to hear about is how that industry in particular is either creating kind of career pathways or wage trajectories out of low wage work, or if that industry is in general one where people earn lower wages, how job quality is being improved, and how kind of pathways for career growth are being built within that industry into kind of higher earnings. I'll pause there for my team and to take in a couple more questions. I think we have about 5 minutes. All right. So there's a question here about if there's a community-based organization that's submitting as a primary institution, would you recommend that the academic PI is a line item in the budget? So Bridget, can you repeat again anything about sub-awards versus awards in this LOI stage, and then what we'll need at the full proposal stage?
Yeah, at the LOI stage, we're not requiring this level of detail just yet. This level of detail will be required in the full proposal stage. But if a community-based organization is submitting as the primary, but the PI is at an academic institution, where they are kind of organizing the budget, or how you communicate how the money is going to be allocated to the PI is detailed in the budget guidance for the full proposal submissions. So this is less important for the LOI application, and more important for the second stage finalists.
Thank you. There's a question when working with employers or other entities, do they need to be identified in the final report, or can they remain anonymous? So there are circumstances where we understand things can be a little bit sensitive in terms of naming particular names. I think tell us a little bit in your LOI, your proposal, kind of what you're proposing and what your approach is. But yes, we're open to kind of approaches that need to preserve a certain level of anonymity. There we go. There's the word. Provided the findings are kind of publicly accessible and there's accountability for how kind of the data is analyzed and collected. But yes, I think we can explore that further when we get there. Regarding diversity of research themes, were there any particular areas of interest, kind of over or underrepresented? Were there any particular gaps in the research themes provided in the RFP that you hope to see addressed this cycle? So we've done kind of a good variety of projects before. I wouldn't say that there are any themes or subtopics where this time around we're going to kind of underweight them. What we really want to know is kind of the impact potential of a particular project, rather than whether it's kind of over or underweighted in our existing portfolio. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. What I will encourage you to do or to check out is WorkRise last year published a series of landscape studies on a subset of our research pillars that called out some very interesting kind of research questions and priorities within those three pillars. And we say a little bit more about that in the full RFP as well. But encourage you to check those out as a subset of things that we were interested in. Again, we're not going to kind of advantage or disadvantage things that fall outside of that scope, but just flagging that as an area of particular interest for our team. And I think that brings us to our time together. I know there are several other questions that are coming in. I will make sure to save this chat and see if there are instances where we can follow up with you if we were unable to answer your questions today. But again, I will offer the workrise@urban.org email address if you have specific questions. And then as we say now in our slides, if you have started your LOI, you should be able to see, kind of your LOI or your funding request ID. We encourage you to share that in the subject line of your email so that we can find on the back end if there are, especially if it's a technical question about the portal, we can locate you. But if it's a general question, I would just encourage you to reference 2023 RFP in your subject line so we know what the question is about, because there is a general WorkRise inbox. But thank you for joining us this afternoon. We are incredibly excited about the work that's ahead. We always hear and receive so many interesting questions and projects, and we know this year will be no different. So thank you again and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.